Okay, so our next speaker is Jean Saragnese. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Jean is the chairman of the board of directors and CEO of MedyMatch, an Israeli startup company dealing in the field of medical imaging. Prior to joining MedyMatch, he was the CEO of Philips Medical Imaging, and before that, he was the CTO of GE Healthcare. The topic of Jean's talk is From Average to Expert, Reducing Medical Diagnostic Errors in the Emergency Room through AI-based Clinical Decision Support.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, it really is. I'm maybe a bit different from the other speakers. As you heard, I'm a business leader. I'm also a technology leader. I'm quite familiar with technologies. But I want to talk to you today about healthcare a bit, AI in healthcare, and I do believe it's a bit different. So it is an opportunity to take you through some things. I'd actually like to start. Where is the advancer? Just the, oh, never mind. I want to start with this picture. So you probably recognize the scene. The scene is a minimally invasive surgery done on someone's knee. This is an orthoscopic procedure. You can also see a small name at the bottom right corner, a guy named Lonnie Paulus. He's the physician who invented the tools that are used in this procedure. And I want to talk a little bit about the concept of invention and adoption, because only through the combination of those two do you have true innovation. So Lonnie invented these tools, and I met him probably 15 years ago at a luncheon, and he was a very humble man, and this story unfolded in front of me. It turns out that when he invented this and introduced it to the Society of Orthopedic Surgeons, they flat out rejected it, completely rejected it. And for 3 years, he struggled to get this technology adopted. He was even thrown out of the Society of Orthopedic Surgeons. Why? Because he was threatening the well-being and the income and the livelihood of the orthopedic surgeons. So as you think about doing what you do, and I am curious, how many people are involved in something in healthcare? Something in healthcare? Okay. Quite a few. When you think about what you're doing, I want to give you some insights into healthcare and what it means to truly innovate in that space. As I said, invention's not enough. It's invention plus acceptance, and that's true innovation. And that is a lesson I've learned many, many times in this space. MedyMatch, what do? We're in the business of bringing decision support tools to the bedside. So our goal is to make decisions, help physicians make decisions in front of patients, very specifically in the acute care setting, the emergency room. Somebody comes in, they're not sure what's wrong. You got to make quick decisions. If you don't make the right decisions, you could really hurt someone. So that's what we're focusing on. I am having a great time with this mouse. So here's some scary statistics, all right? Did you know, right? First of all, there's about $6 to $7 trillion spent around the world in healthcare. The United States manages to spend $4 trillion of it. Yet every year we kill between 40 and 100,000 people just due to medical errors. Anybody know that? That's quite a few people. If you look at the history of medical diagnosis, there's been an error rate around 30%, and that, even with all the new technologies, hasn't changed in 30 years. And if you look more specifically in the area of imaging, 80% of the errors are simply associated with the fact that the human visual system is not that effective in identifying features, if you will, within images. So I want to talk to you just about healthcare, because a lot of people think it's complicated. For those involved, I think it is important to at least understand some of the fundamentals about healthcare. And if you look in different parts of the world, healthcare systems are different. The way people are paid for services are different. So as you think about innovation, you need to think about how you get to market. But there are some very, very common elements. The fact of the matter is there's more patients today than there's ever been. There's more resources and money being spent today than ever in the history of the planet, yet there's still 2 billion people that go unserved even with the most basic care. So the good news about those who raise their hand or those who might be interested in entering the healthcare field, there's a tremendous need in this space and a tremendous opportunity to have an impact on thousands, if not millions of people. I believe the following. I believe that deep learning will ignite a revolution and bring AI to the bedside. Now I will tell you this, that healthcare is behind. Healthcare is quite a bit far behind in the area of artificial intelligence and applying machine learning. And I'll explain why I think that is. But the one thing I do believe is that the future of care is at the confluence of the insight of the physician, because you still need that interaction. You still need to interact with a patient and certainly need to affect therapies. But it comes at the confluence of what the physicians know and what we will bring collectively in the area of artificial intelligence. So as you think about what you might be working on or thinking about, is there a place for it? I've used this guidance for the last 20 years in terms of developing products. Products are complicated. But at the end of the day, if you're not delivering better care with greater access, you're missing something. You really are. The problem in healthcare today is there's a lack of quality, a lack of reach. So really driving quality up, waste out, cost out, and fundamentally allowing caregivers to reach further, to reach considerably more patients. That's my true north. That's the thing I keep close to my heart each and every time I go to develop a new product. And I've been doing this for quite a while. As I said, I've been in the healthcare industry for the last 22 years or so, developing products in information technology, in imaging, so even including some wetware devices as well. So what are my core beliefs? And I do think healthcare is different, and I'll tell you why in just a minute, even more so since the things I've been saying. I believe that the way to actually affect change here and the way to problem solve here has to occur at the intersection of the following three critical, if you will, spaces. One is, of course, the technologies that are associated with deep learning, the new techniques, the new insights that are available. But if you ignore the deep clinical insight, that is to say, if you don't take advantage of what we already know in healthcare, the problem will be too unstructured, too complex, and you'll require way too much data to actually converge. And I also want to talk about this concept of the right data. Again, in healthcare, and I'll show you some data that would indicate that healthcare data is noisy, it's sparse, it's also very expensive. So the concept of really figuring out how to structure the problem with deep insight, really leveraging the right data and bringing forth the state-of-the-art AI tools. Just a bit about technology barriers and some of the cautions. This page. So if you look to the left-hand side of this page, you'll see medical records. So the medical record is the electronic record that's used to house all of what we know about you as patients. Not everybody has a medical record, but many do. Inside that medical record, there is a lot of data about you, your personal history, your family history, your blood type, all the tests that have been run on you, and also imaging reports, but not imaging itself. I have a deep background in medical imaging, and I'll show you some, I think, compelling data as to why imaging is extraordinarily important. And if you are to consider the whole patient, it's extraordinarily important to consider imaging. If you look on the other side of this page, it's my belief that the right data to be looking at is data which is structured images plus all the other patient data. And if you look at what imaging brings a great deal, and I'll show you some examples of this, but full 3D insight, anatomic detail, physiological, metabolic, dynamic information, longitudinal information, and including down to visualization of gene expression, protein expressions, and so on. So that insight that's inherent in imaging is something that many people are leaving off the table when considering the holistic evaluation of the patient. So within MedyMatch, we are operating on the right-hand side of this page and considering the holistic story around the patient imaging plus the surrounding patient data. I've seen at least 2 presentations which quite frankly were extraordinarily impressive and very interesting, and they do relate to finding and relating to images. So I love having the picture of the cat because it's sort of a classic problem. If you look on the right-hand side of this page, this is a non-contrast CT image of a head. It's noisy, it's 3-dimensional, it's not so easy to understand. And I'll talk a little bit about ground truth in a minute, but certainly a 3-year-old can find a cat. Only an expert can find the pathology in the image on the right-hand side. So although there's this incredible richness of information, it's complicated and certainly 2 to 3 orders of magnitude more complex than what it takes to find the cat. So I'm going to talk about truthing. So we all deal with the same problem as we're trying to train. It's what is ground truth. So for Amazon, and Amazon's done a fantastic job, and they can basically read my mind in terms of what I want, but they've got 244 million customers, and they know their names, their addresses, they know what they buy, they know how often they buy, they have a SKU, they know the colors, they know the price. Healthcare doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. And quite frankly, Amazon has a pretty good understanding of my taste, and they would realize that that's actually the lamp that I would buy. Probably not great taste, but it is what it is. If you look at ground truth, and again in healthcare, and particularly in the imaging space, this is John Smith, who showed up with a severe headache. Does he have a migraine or does he have a stroke? If you think it's a migraine, you send him home and it's a stroke, you could kill the guy. So the decisions we're making are high-stakes decisions, and the regulators in the industry are very interested in us making the right decisions, because if we kill somebody, they're not really going to be very happy with us. So for those working in a non-regulated space, it's really easy to express yourself technically. It's incredibly easier to bring value. There's no barriers, if you will, other than your inventiveness and finding a real business case. In healthcare, you've got to prove to the regulators that you're not going to kill somebody. And oh, by the way, it's a pretty big responsibility. You would actually like not to be responsible for someone's death. So this comes back to ground truth, though. That's a complicated image, and the reality is that this is a stroke, and that is a hemorrhagic stroke that's identified there, and it's expensive and challenging. So this comes back to this concept of you really need to bring the clinical understanding to the problem, structure the problem, and you need to really be dealing in the smallest data universe you can that allows you to converge on a classifier. Here's some images just for fun. So these happen to be CT images with really exquisite detail of anatomy. These images, these are on the right-hand side is actually a PET image, which is identifying cancer by virtue of looking at an increase in consumption of sugar. So it's really looking at metabolism. On the right-hand side, this is actually a CT image, and it's looking at areas of a stroke. And if you look at the green area on the page that says infarct and penumbra, that green area is an area of brain that's at risk. And if you treat that patient, that tissue can recover. The red portion of that is tissue which is dead. If you looked at this patient, it was all red, you wouldn't treat the patient. If you looked at this patient, it's all green, you treat the patient. If it's something in between, then you got to think really, really hard, because if you put blood back into that red space, the person can bleed out and die. These are the types of decisions that we're trying to help physicians with. 3 o'clock in the morning. They're tired. Their kid was up all night last night. They're the kind of decisions they have to make. They're all life or death. Here's another image. These are spectacular. The one on the right-hand side is a white matter map. Your brain has all kinds of wiring, and you're familiar with the cortex, and how the cortex interconnects is through white matter structure. So fantastic insight. Brain function, that happens to be an MR image, and that's saying, hey, when this person happens to be using this part of its brain. on a particular function. So there's an enormous amount of insight that can be derived from these images. If you look at, again, the image to the right is a PET image, and those patterns allow physicians to determine whether or not this person has a type of neurodegenerative disease. Does the person have Alzheimer's, or does the person have a Lewy body disease? They have to treat them entirely different. Recognizing those patterns and understanding those patterns are exactly the type of challenges that this community and we within MedyMatch want to take on. Providing insight, providing confidence will connect patients to treatment much faster and certainly save lives. Again, more around the visualization, and actually these are cell receptors visualization. So attacking the right problem, where did we start and why? We started with stroke. Stroke has, and I apologize for the US details, it's just a little easier to get the data. In 2012, 800,000 cases of stroke projected to be on the order of 3.4 million by 2030, and a spend of around $240 billion. Now, what you don't know is that a good portion of that $240 billion is spent on patients that require long-term care. So here's a question for you. If you go into a community hospital and you have a stroke that's treatable by a chemical called TPA, what's the likelihood you're going to be treated? Anybody want to guess? This is where audience participation comes in. Otherwise, I just talk to myself for a while. So throw some things at me. What are the chances you're going to be? 50%. Somebody said 50%. Do I hear it? Low or higher? 5%. I heard 5%. 2%. If you go into an academic institution with exactly the same problem, what's the likelihood you're going to be treated?
50%.
I heard 50. You're really stuck on 50%. 24%. There's a 10 times higher likelihood you'll be treated for stroke if you go to the right hospital. So my recommendation, you ought to think about what hospital you're going to. Our goal is to make every physician an expert every time. That's the goal. We want to put decision support tools in the hands of these physicians so at 3 o'clock in the morning, even if they haven't seen this patient, this type of patient that many times, they can make the decision. They can make the decision. Malpractice in this space is exclusively 100% associated with not being treated. It's not about mistreatment, it's about not being treated. Stroke is a disease that must be treated in a very small and very tight window of time. It's like a heart attack. You know, your brain will lose cells over time. You must treat quickly, and if you're not sure about what to do, you don't treat. If you don't treat, this person ends up in a bed. So our goal is to keep patients out of bed, and our goal is to liberate the costs associated with long-term care of patients and return those people to productive lives. We can do that if we can move the 2% treatment to 24% treatment where it should be. And that's what we're trying to do within MedyMatch, and that's why we're focusing on stroke. We think it's a great place to start. So, again, our goal is to make every physician a life-saving physician every time, and there's a lot of work that's being done, and I think it's extremely interesting work, and a lot of population analysis that's being done, looking at the genome, the proteome, family history, and I think that's incredibly wonderful work, and inevitably will lead to some great results. But we're focusing on patient-specific. It's about that patient. Decision support at the bedside. That's what we're working on. Our first application is in the area of intracranial bleed detection. And, there's a complex set of work that goes on behind the scenes, but essentially we're just circling areas for consideration by a physician. Let me show you some images. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning. You're all 3 o'clock in the morning, and now you're responsible for diagnosing a stroke patient. So I'll give you a hint. We're looking for bleeds. Bleeds tend to be lighter in color than the rest of the brain. So is there a bleed in this image? Yes, there is. Is there a bleed in this image? What's the verdict? What are we going to do with this guy? There's no bleed in that image. These are not simple. They're not simple. And as I said, when you're a physician and you're under pressure, and if you make the wrong call, remember, if you treat a patient with a blood thinner, because that's what you do, that has a bleed, you're gonna hurt them severely or kill them. If you think they have a bleed and you don't treat them for an ischemic stroke, you condemn them to either death or a life of disability. Bleed or no bleed? Bleed. Bleed. Just keep score on yourself. Bleed or no bleed? What do you think? At least I know how many people are awake by how much moaning is going on in the audience. It's great. It's great. There's a bleed in this image. Bleed or no bleed? Now, I put this image in for a reason. You know, I told you bright objects are bleeds, and there's a very bright object in this image. And you know, unfortunately, every patient is not the same, and there's an awful lot of anatomy that can fool the machine. And there's no bleed in this image. This one? Did you get that one? I'm almost done. Yes or no? Show of hands, yes. Show of hands, no. The yeses killed this guy, sorry. So I show you these images. The last one is actually fairly easy to visualize. So I just wanted to give you a sense of the challenges, and there's certainly challenges in terms of machine vision and deep vision technologies and techniques. I'm going to make a point. These last points here are points you all know. You know, this community knows, but the business leaders in the world don't necessarily know. You guys know what it takes to make a classifier. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. And you also know that one classifier becomes a feature for the second classifier. You guys know that. Business leaders in the world don't necessarily know that. And this was one of the things that I discovered along the way that was important to me, because as you run a business in this space, the way you bring things together, you can create a ton of value, especially in healthcare, because the expense of bringing that first application to the marketplace is high. You got to get through regulatory. That barrier is high, and you can build far more complex classifiers that allow us to do what we really want to do. We really want to move from diagnosis, and we want to move up the food chain to full assessment, patient assessment, allowing us to connect the appropriate treatment path to that particular patient. And that really is bringing together a combination of classifiers allow us to create that value. Again, you know that, but this concept of running a business around these principles, not so many people do. Not so many people do. Certainly from the world I come from, and certainly from the world of healthcare. So I'm going to leave you with these points. So what are my thoughts on healthcare? Look, stay focused around the real problem. You're just trying to figure out how to treat more patients, and the best way to do that is drive quality outcomes and cost. Do think nonlinearly, or maybe what I should say to this community is help the people in healthcare understand how to think nonlinearly. Because healthcare is driven by this by the scientific method, and they will never skip a step. It's always linear. You can help them understand that this world can be nonlinear. Regulatory really does matter. Deep learning is perceived by many as a threat to their jobs. If you don't take that into consideration, you're going to be like Lonnie 3 years later, sitting with unbelievable technology that revolutionized the world and not being able to employ it, and actually being thrown out of the society that would sponsor it. So think about who your stakeholders are. And the last thing is, as a business leader, I've learned a lot, and I really do appreciate everything I learned from the technical team in MedyMatch. And together, I've learned a lot about the technology and what's possible, and it's amazing, truly is. But the things I've also taken back is that you need to think about business in a very different way, and you need to think about healthcare in a very different way. It's an extraordinarily exciting space. I have walked down hospitals' hallways. I've had people in tears come up to me and hug me, because of a test they ran on my machine that was either a good outcome or a bad outcome, but it was an outcome. It helped them understand where they were. Healthcare is a remarkable space. It's a remarkable opportunity to help the world deal with one of its biggest problems. And I believe AI is extraordinarily well positioned. What you know and what you can do will have a remarkable impact in this space. Thank you very much. Let there be light. Any questions?
What's the success percentage of the system that recognizes?
I'm not going to give you specifics. I will tell you that we are about, let's say, 20 to 30 points better than the average physician. There's actually a strong need here, and we perform very nicely relative to that benchmark. Yes?
I have a question. How can you explain that CAD, I mean, computers aided diagnosis has been, for years and 10 and 20 years maybe, and it's not been adopted by big vendors like GE and Philips, and why do you think that would be adopted? I mean, technology exists for many years, so how do you envision?
I spent 5 years trying to develop a normal model for a lung. 5 years, 5 solid years. All the knowledge-based CAD work that has been done is long, difficult, not so accurate. So I separate myself from CAD. The other thing is we made it very clear that this classifier, the space we're in, must include all the other patient data. Because if you're going to solve any real problems in healthcare, you need to consider the richness of the 3D information plus the other patient data. And CAD simply didn't have that capability. So we're in a different world.
So one last question before we move on.
Hello. Just a question regarding regulatory, FDA. What is the I know the stance more or less, but in terms of emergency care and all that, what's their current position?
This application is receiving a fair amount of scrutiny from the FDA. So it's actually a Class 3 device, which I actually consider it's an indication of how important the device is. The recommendation I would make to this crowd, anyone who's interacting with the FDA, think about speaking their language. So the first thing the FDA said was, is your machine going to learn? And by the way, a key piece of this, of course, is feedback and learning, and that's a key part of what MedyMatch is about. But as soon as the FDA said that, I knew exactly what they were asking. And the answer is, we will release this product on a regular basis through the traditional regulatory channels, and it's not going to sit there in an unsupervised manner and learn and do something different that we don't understand. So as long as you sit in front of the FDA, speak their language, you're fine. If you start speaking too much of sort of, if you will, machine learning language to them, they'll wig out. I don't know if wig out actually translates, but they won't be happy. But you can communicate in their language, and you just have to be careful, thoughtful about how you talk to them, and they make sure they understand and educate. We have a full approval and a path that we're on, and very happy with the relationship we have with the FDA. Thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure.